Cyrus was 38 years old, made $62,000 a year as a master diesel mechanic, and was watching his life burn to the ground over a plate of lukewarm pot roast. The devastating situation unfolded not in a fiery explosion or a quiet courtroom, but in the polished mahogany dining room of his in-laws' Somerville home. It was 7:14 p.m. on a humid Augusta Sunday. The air, thick with the scent of overcooked green beans, and his mother-in-law Eleanor's $180 Chanel No. 5 perfume, felt heavy enough to suffocate him. He had just delivered the news he'd been practicing for a week, his voice carefully calibrated to sound broken. "The shop. It's over," he said, letting his gaze fall to his worn hands, the knuckles permanently stained with grease that no amount of industrial solvent could ever fully remove. "The last big contract fell through. I can't make payroll. I'm closing the doors at the end of the month." A thick, terrible silence descended on the table. He could feel 10 pairs of eyes on him. His wife, Roxanne, sat to his left, her face a perfect mask of concerned sympathy, but he saw the flicker of something else in her eyes, something sharp and bright. Across from him, her father, Marcus Green, a man who managed a regional bank branch and wore $3,000 Italian suits, slowly placed his fork down. Marcus had never approved of his daughter marrying a man who worked with his hands. To him, Cyrus wasn't a skilled tradesman running a vital local business. He was just a man in a $45 pair of Dickies work pants who smelled of diesel fuel. Cyrus risked a glance around the table. Roxanne's 2 brothers, their wives, her sister, and her husband were all present. The 6 of them lived in a neat little cluster of rental houses on a street called Cedar Lane, a fact that was a constant low-grade source of irritation for Marcus and Eleanor, but a point of pride for Roxanne, who loved having her siblings close. Marcus cleared his throat, his expression grave. "Well, Cyrus, that is unfortunate news." The words were right, but the tone was all wrong. It lacked any warmth, any genuine sorrow. It was the same tone he used when discussing a stock that had underperformed by 1/4 of a point. Then it happened. It started with Roxanne's brother, David, a man who sold insurance and drove a leased $52,000 Lexus. A slow smile spread across his face. He caught the eye of his sister, Tanisha. She smiled back. A current of unspoken energy passed between the Green siblings, a shared, triumphant thought that was as loud in the quiet room as a klaxon horn. And then Marcus Green, the patriarch, the man of supposed dignity, raised his crystal water glass. It was a $90 glass from a set of 12. "A toast," he announced, his voice suddenly booming with a strange, inappropriate joy. Cyrus felt his blood run cold. He watched, as if in slow motion, as every single member of the Green family, his wife included, raised their glasses. Roxanne, his wife of 10 years, the woman he had supported, loved, and built a life with, lifted her glass, the $15,000 diamond ring he'd bought her after a particularly good year at the shop flashing under the chandelier. "To new beginnings," Marcus declared, his eyes shining, "and to family," Eleanor added, her voice syrupy sweet. David couldn't contain himself. He grinned, a wide predatory expression. "And to Cedar Lane," he almost shouted, "finally ours alone." A chorus of cheers erupted. "Cedar Lane," they echoed. Glasses clinked together in a cacophony of celebration. They were cheering his ruin. They were toasting the collapse of his life's work, the business he had built from nothing with his own 2 hands. They weren't just indifferent to his pain, they were reveling in it. And in that moment, Cyrus understood everything. His failure was their victory. What he didn't know was that this was the moment he'd been waiting for. They thought this was the end of his story. They had no idea it was the beginning of theirs, Have you ever been in a situation where the people who should have been your biggest supporters were secretly hoping for your downfall? We're going to explore what happens when that secret wish comes true in the worst possible way for them. Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to cut ties with family for your own peace of mind. The facade of their life together had been expertly constructed mostly by him. Their home? A modest but well-kept 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet Augusta neighborhood, was a testament to his steady work. He'd personally laid the $6,000 worth of reclaimed hardwood floors in the living room and spent a month of weekends building the $4,500 custom deck out back. The mortgage payment was $1,970 a month, a figure he met without fail, even in lean times. Roxanne, who worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office for about $28,000 a year, saw her income as her personal spending money. His $62,000 salary covered everything else: the mortgage, the utilities that ran about $400 a month, the $550 monthly car payment for her white Acura RDX, the groceries that cost nearly $800 a month because she insisted on shopping exclusively at Whole Foods. He remembered a scene from 3 years prior with perfect, painful clarity. It was a Saturday morning in April. He was sitting at their small kitchen table, a $400 oak piece he'd refinished himself, nursing a cup of coffee in his favorite $15 ceramic mug. He was wearing his usual weekend attire, a faded Morehouse College sweatshirt and a pair of $30 jeans. He was trying to figure out how to budget for a new piece of equipment for the shop, a top-of-the-line engine diagnostic machine that cost a staggering $43,000. It would increase his efficiency by 30%, allowing him to take on more complex, higher-paying jobs, but it was a massive capital expense. Roxanne walked into the kitchen, a vision in a $250 silk robe. Her hair, a cascade of intricate braids woven by a stylist she paid $300 a session to see every 6 weeks, was pulled back from her face. Her deep brown skin was luminous in the morning light. She floated over to the coffee machine, a $700 Breville espresso maker he'd bought for her birthday, and prepared herself a latte. "Morning, baby," he'd said, trying to keep the financial stress out of his voice. "Morning," she replied, not looking at him. She took a delicate sip from her cup. "I was online last night. Neiman Marcus is having a sale. There's this Louis Vuitton bag, the Neverfull GM. It's perfect for summer. It's only $1,200. He blinked, the numbers on his spreadsheet blurring. $1,200. That was nearly 2 months of groceries. It was the down payment on the financing for the diagnostic machine. "Roxy, honey, I don't know. Things are a little tight right now. I'm trying to save up for this new machine for the shop." She turned to him then, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising in an expression of mild annoyance. "Cyrus, it's a classic bag. It's an investment. Besides, your shop is always tight. It's a garage. It's not like it's a real business like Daddy's bank." The casual cruelty of her words landed like a physical blow. A garage. He'd poured 10 years of his life, countless 16-hour days, and every spare dollar he had into building Cyrus Diesel Repair from a one-bay operations into a respected, profitable business that serviced half the long-haul trucks passing through Augusta. He employed 2 other mechanics, both good men with families to support. But to her and to her family, it was just a garage, a dirty place where he got his hands greasy. "It is a real business, Roxanne," he said, his voice quiet. "It pays for this house. It pays for your car. It pays for the coffee in that $700 machine." She waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a bag. I'll put it on the credit card." The credit card, of course, was in his name, and he was the one who paid the $4,000 to $5,000 balance every month. He didn't argue further. He just nodded, a familiar feeling of resignation settling in his gut. He ended up buying the bag. He also ended up taking out a high-interest loan for the diagnostic machine, setting his business plans back by at least a year. The incident was a perfect snapshot of their dynamic: his labor, her consumption; his reality, her fantasy. Her family only amplified this dynamic, treating him like a walking ATM with grease under his fingernails. The escalating betrayal wasn't a single, dramatic event, but a slow, creeping poison that seeped into the foundations of his marriage and his self-respect. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, a relentless campaign of casual disrespect and overt condescension from the entire Green clan, with his wife, Roxanne, often leading the charge. They saw his hard-earned money as their birthright and his profession as a source of second-hand embarrassment. One particularly galling memory was from a family barbecue at Marcus and Eleanor's house 2 summers ago. The Somerville home was a sprawling, 2-story colonial valued at over $380,000, with a perfectly manicured lawn and a backyard that looked like a page from a magazine. Cyrus had spent the morning at his shop dealing with a catastrophic engine failure on a Peterbilt truck, and he arrived late, still in his work clothes. He hadn't had time to go home and change. The smell of diesel clung to his shirt. He walked onto the patio, where the family was gathered around a massive $4,000 stainless steel grill. Marcus was holding court, a glass of $80 single malt scotch in his hand. He took one look at Cyrus, and his upper lip curled in a barely concealed sneer. "Cyrus," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "good of you to join us. Did you manage to wash the shop off you before you came into a civilized home?" Laughter rippled through the family. Cyrus felt his face flush with heat. He looked at Roxanne, hoping for a word of defense, a supportive glance. Instead, she just shook her head with a little sigh, as if he were a disobedient child who had tracked mud on a clean carpet. "Honestly, Cyrus, you could have stopped at home," she said, her voice laced with disappointment. "You know how Daddy is about cleanliness." Later that evening, he overheard a conversation not meant for his ears. He was inside getting a bottle of water from the kitchen's $12,000 Sub-Zero refrigerator when he heard Roxanne's sister, Tanisha, and her brother, David, talking in the adjacent hallway. "I just don't know how she stands it," Tanisha said in a stage whisper. "The smell. And he's always so tired. All that manual labor, it's so common." "Tell me about it," David scoffed. "But hey, at least his common labor pays for her Acura, and it helps us with the rent on Cedar Lane. We have to give the man that. He's a useful beast of burden." A useful beast of burden. The words hit him harder than a fist. He stood frozen in the kitchen, the cold water bottle sweating in his hand. He looked down at his calloused palms, the network of small scars and healed-over cuts that told the story of his life's work. He had always been proud of those hands. They were the hands of a man who built things, who fixed what was broken. But to them, they were just the dirty paws of an animal that provided for their needs. He walked back out to the patio, said nothing, and endured the rest of the evening with a hollow ache in his chest. The Cedar Lane situation was another constant source of humiliation. The 6 Green siblings lived in 6 identical rental houses on the same street, a cozy little enclave of family. What they never let Cyrus forget was that he was the reason they could afford it. The landlord, a faceless property management company based out of Atlanta, required a significant security deposit and first and last month's rent up front for each house. The total came to nearly $27,000. None of the siblings had that kind of cash. Cyrus had fronted the entire amount. He had taken it from his business savings, a fund he was building to one day expand his shop and buy the land it sat on. He did it for Roxanne because she'd pleaded with him, telling him how much it would mean to her to have her family so close. "It's an investment in our family, baby," she had cooed, stroking his arm. "They'll pay you back, I promise." They never did. Not a single dollar. When he gently brought it up to Roxanne a year later, she had become indignant, My God, Cyrus, are you really going to hold that money over their heads? Their family. What's yours is ours. That's what marriage is. Their complaints about the rent were unending and always directed at him as if he were responsible. Tanisha's husband, Jamal, who worked in IT, cornered him at a Christmas party. Man, this rent is killing us. $1,450 a month for that little box. The landlord won't even fix the leaky faucet in the guest bath. You'd think for that kind of money, you'd get better service. Cyrus just nodded, absorbing the complaint. He knew for a fact that the property management company was exceptionally responsive. He also knew that the market rate for a 3-bedroom house in that area was closer to $1,700 a month. They were getting a deal, but in their minds, they were entitled to more, and he was the one who should somehow provide it. They saw his bank account as a communal resource and his hard work as their safety net. The disrespect was a constant grinding pressure, wearing away at his love for his wife and his tolerance for her family until there was almost nothing left. He had no idea just how deep their entitlement ran, but he was beginning to suspect it was a well with no bottom. The discovery, the moment the final, fragile pane of glass shattered, happened on a rainy Tuesday night in October, 6 months before the fateful Sunday dinner. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or an intercepted letter. It was a quiet, sickening revelation, delivered through the cold blue light of a smartphone screen. Cyrus had been working late, wrestling with a stubborn fuel injector on a Cummins engine. He finally got home at 9:30 p.m., exhausted and smelling of solvent. The house was quiet. Roxanne was already in bed, asleep. He took a quick shower, the hot water doing little to ease the deep ache in his bones. He climbed into bed, careful not to wake her. Her phone, a $1,300 iPhone 14 Pro, was on her nightstand, buzzing softly. A text message notification lit up the screen. He glanced over, not out of suspicion, but just out of habit. And then he saw the words. It was a group chat. The name at the top read Green Machine. It included Roxanne and all 5 of her siblings. The last message was from her brother David. David, did the work mule deposit the rent money yet? The first is Friday. Cyrus's heart stopped. The work mule, that was him. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He knew they were disrespectful, but this was different. This was their private name for him. This was how they saw him in the unguarded moments when they thought no one was listening. He carefully picked up the phone. Her passcode was her birthday, a simple 6-digit code he knew as well as his own. His hands were trembling as he unlocked it and opened the message thread. He started scrolling up. It was a graveyard of his dignity, months, maybe years, of their private thoughts laid bare. Tanisha. Ugh. Cyrus smells like a gas station again. Roxy, you need to make him shower outside. Roxanne. LOL, I try, but you know how he is. At least his hands are good for something. Dollar Jamal, Tanisha's husband. Speaking of which, is he going to spring for that beach trip this year? I'm not paying for my own flight to Destin. Roxanne. I'm working on it. Have to massage the beast's ego a little first. Tell him how proud I am of his little garage. He kept scrolling, his breath catching in his throat. They mocked his clothes, his truck, a 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles that he kept meticulously maintained. His simple tastes, his love for his work. They shared photos of him sleeping on the couch, exhausted after a long day, with laughing emojis. And then he found the thread that broke him completely. It was from about a year ago, when his business had a genuinely tough quarter. A major client had gone bankrupt, leaving him with a $30,000 unpaid invoice. He had been stressed, quiet, and had confided in Roxanne, telling her he was worried about the future of the shop. Roxanne, in the group chat, C is having a meltdown about the shop. Thinks he might go under. Honestly, it might be for the best. David. For real? What would happen? Roxanne. He'd have to sell it. Probably get a real job, maybe something in management. We'd have a normal life. No more grease. And he'd have to sell the properties to get cash. The properties. Cyrus's blood turned to ice. She knew. She had to know. Tanisha. Wait. What properties? Roxanne. The Cedar Lane houses, silly. Who do you think your landlord is? He bought them all back in 2017. Has them in some secret company name? He thinks I don't know. He felt the air leave his lungs. He sank down onto the edge of the bed, the phone heavy as a block of lead in his hand. She had known all along. For 5 years, she had known that he was the owner of her siblings' homes. She had let them complain to his face about the rent. She had pleaded with him for the security deposit money for houses he already owned. She had participated in this charade, this elaborate humiliation, every single day. And her endgame was clear. She wanted his business to fail, so he would be forced to sell his assets, her family's homes, and they could somehow take them over. The phrase David had used in his toast echoed in his mind. Cedar Lane. Finally, ours alone. It wasn't a spontaneous celebration. It was a long-held plan. He placed the phone back on the nightstand, exactly as he had found it. He looked at his wife, sleeping peacefully. Her beautiful face, serene. She looked like an angel, but he knew now that she was a viper. He stood up and walked out of the bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. He went into his small home office and sat down in the dark. The rain tapped against the window pane. In that moment, the love he had for her died. It didn't fade away. It was executed swiftly and without ceremony. In its place, something cold and hard began to form. It was the beginning of a plan. The next morning, at 6:47 a.m., Cyrus was not at his shop. He was sitting in a plush leather chair across a polished mahogany desk from a man named Samuel Briggs. Briggs was a 55-year-old black man with a shaved head, a perfectly trimmed graying beard, and a gaze that could cut through steel. He was the best corporate attorney in Augusta, and his services were not cheap, billing at $1,200 per hour. Cyrus had hired him 6 years ago to set up the legal framework for his growing business empire. "She knows," Cyrus said, his voice flat. He had not slept. "She knows about Cedar Lane Properties, LLC." Samuel Briggs listened without interruption as Cyrus recounted the story of the text messages. He didn't flinch, didn't show any surprise. He simply steepled his fingers, his expression one of intense focus. When Cyrus finished, the lawyer nodded slowly. "I see," Briggs said. "And this performance you're planning for the Sunday dinner. You are certain this is the path you wish to take?" "I am," Cyrus replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "They built this. I'm just going to show them the final product." "Very well," Briggs said. He swiveled his chair to face a large monitor. "Let's review the assets and the corporate veil. Cedar Lane Properties, LLC, was established on May 12, 2017. You are the sole member. The LLC purchased 6 properties on Cedar Lane for a total of $1.1 million. You secured a commercial loan for $800,000, and the remaining $300,000 was a cash injection from the profits of Cyrus Diesel Repair." Cyrus remembered that cash injection. It had been the result of 3 years of relentless work, of sleeping on a cot at the shop some nights, of rebuilding engines until his hands were raw. He had poured his life into that down payment. "The properties have appreciated," Briggs continued, tapping a few keys. "Current market valuation is approximately $1.7 million. The loan balance is down to $620,000. Your equity is just over $1 million. He paused. "The leases for all 6 tenants, David Green, Tanisha Williams, and so on, are all month to month. As per Georgia law, you can terminate tenancy for any reason with a 60-day written notice. Briggs printed a stack of documents. These are the original deeds, the articles of organization for the LLC, and the current property management agreement with Apex Holdings. Apex is the firewall. They collect the rent, handle maintenance requests, and remit the net income to the LLC's bank account. The Greens have never had any direct contact with you as the owner. The veil is secure. Cyrus looked at the papers. It was his secret empire, built in plain sight. He had started buying the properties as a long-term investment, a way to build wealth beyond the grueling day-to-day of the shop. He had dreamed of one day giving them to Roxanne, of revealing his success and seeing the pride in her eyes. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. Now for the main house, Briggs said, his tone shifting. The house in Somerville. It's in your name and Roxanne's. You have about $200,000 in equity. In a divorce, that will likely be split. However, there may be a path to a more favorable outcome. He pulled up another file. You also personally own the building and the land your shop is on, purchased in 2019 for $250,000. It's now worth closer to $400,000. That is a premarital asset, purchased with an inheritance from your mother. It is shielded. Your business itself, Cyrus Diesel Repair, Inc., also has significant value: goodwill, equipment, client lists. We need to protect that. For the next 2 hours, they mapped out the strategy. The plan was simple and brutal. Step 1. Cyrus would begin quietly moving liquid assets from his personal accounts into the business accounts, making himself appear cash poor. Step 2. He would manufacture a believable crisis at the shop. He'd let his 2 mechanics in on the plan, promising them a significant bonus for their discretion and cooperation. Step 3. He would stage his announcement of failure at the Sunday dinner. Step 4. The strike. Briggs's office would prepare 6 identical lease termination notices. They would be legally ironclad. You will hand them 1 envelope, Briggs instructed. Inside will be 6 letters, 1 for each household, along with a copy of the deed for each of their homes, clearly showing Cedar Lane Properties, LLC, as the owner, and a copy of the LLC's formation document showing you as the sole member. There will be no ambiguity. Cyrus nodded, a grim sense of purpose solidifying within him. And Roxanne? We will file for divorce on Monday morning at 9 a.m. The petition will cite irreconcilable differences. We will offer her a settlement. She walks away with her car, her personal belongings, and $25,000 in cash. If she refuses and tries to fight for half of everything, we will introduce the text messages as evidence of a conspiracy to defraud you of your assets. It will get ugly for her, and very public. My guess is she will take the deal. Cyrus left the lawyer's office feeling strangely calm. The path ahead was clear. The cost was high: his marriage, the life he thought he had, but the price of continuing the lie was his soul. He drove his old Camry not to his shop, but to a small print shop on Broad Street. He paid $75 to have the legal documents Briggs had given him printed on high-quality bond paper. He bought a simple, elegant manila envelope. The stage was being set. The 6 months that followed were the hardest of Cyrus's life. Playing dumb was an exercise in supreme self-control, a performance that deserved an award. He had to go home every night and get into bed with a woman who despised him, a woman who was actively wishing for his failure. He had to smile, make small talk, and pretend that the foundation of his world hadn't crumbled into dust. Each lie was a scene in a tragic play. One evening, Roxanne came home glowing, brandishing a pair of Christian Louboutin heels with their signature red soles. "Look what I got," she chirped, pulling them from a box. They were on sale, only $800. A year ago, he would have been frustrated, but would have ultimately acquiesced. Now he felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. He looked at the $800 shoes and thought of them as evidence, Exhibit A in the case against her. "They're beautiful, honey," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of his old self. "You deserve them." He knew the credit card bill would arrive, and he would pay it without comment. It was the last pair of expensive shoes he would ever buy for her. The interactions with her family were even more difficult. He had to sit through their Sunday dinners, listening to their thinly veiled insults and their endless complaints, all while knowing their deepest, darkest secret. Tanisha's husband, Jamal, cornered him one afternoon while he was helping Marcus fix a loose railing on the porch. "So, Cyrus," Jamal began, leaning against the column, "I was thinking. My boy is starting soccer, and Tanisha's minivan is getting old. You guys have that second car, the Camry. You're never driving it. You should just give it to us. You can write it off as a gift or something." The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He wanted Cyrus to just give him his car. The reliable Toyota that had never let him down, the car he owned outright. Cyrus felt a flash of hot anger but forced it down. "I'll think about it, Jamal," he said, his voice tight. "It's a good car. I need it for parts runs sometimes." "Parts runs," Jamal scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Man, just sell the garage and get a real job already. You'd get a company car then. Problem solved." Cyrus just turned back to the railing, tightening a bolt with his wrench. The creak of the metal was the only reply. He was gathering evidence, not just texts and legal documents, but a library of slights and insults, a catalog of their breathtaking entitlement. Each condescending remark, each greedy request, was another brick in the wall he was building around his heart. He began orchestrating the downturn at his shop with meticulous care. He told his two mechanics, Andre and Paul, the truth. He sat them down in his small office, the air thick with the smell of coffee and hydraulic fluid, and laid it all out. He showed them a redacted copy of the text messages. Andre, a big man with gentle eyes and 20 years of experience, shook his head slowly. "That's cold, man. Stone cold." "I need your help," Cyrus said. "I need things to look bad. I'm going to stop taking on new clients for a few months. We'll slow down the workflow. I need you to tell anyone who asks that business is slow, that we're in trouble." He slid 2 envelopes across the desk. "There's a $10,000 bonus in each of those for your trouble and your silence. And when this is over, I'm promoting you both to shop foreman and giving you a 20% raise." Their loyalty was absolute. They played their parts perfectly. The hum of activity at Cyrus Diesel Repair quieted. The parking lot, usually full of massive trucks, often had empty spaces. Word began to trickle out into the small world of Augusta's industrial sector that Cyrus's shop was struggling. The whispers inevitably made their way back to the Green family, and he could see the predatory gleam in their eyes growing brighter with each passing week. They were like vultures circling, waiting for the final breath. And all the while, Cyrus smiled, played the part of the worried husband, and waited for the final Sunday in April. Have you ever had to put on a brave face while planning your next move? The strength it takes to remain calm under pressure is immense. Share your stories of strategic patience in the comments below. The day of the strike arrived cloaked in a beautiful spring afternoon. The sky over Augusta was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The azaleas in Eleanor's garden were in full, riotous bloom. It was the perfect day for an execution. Cyrus drove to the dinner in his Camry, Roxanne having taken her Acura separately. He was wearing a simple but clean pair of khaki pants, a pressed blue button-down shirt, and his trusty $89 Timex watch. In the passenger seat, inside a crisp manila envelope, lay the end of the Green family's world as they knew it. The paper felt heavy, dense with consequence. Dinner was a tense, theatrical affair. Cyrus played his role to perfection, picking at his food, sighing heavily, and offering one-word answers to any questions. The Greens, in turn, buzzed with a barely concealed energy. They were electric with anticipation, exchanging knowing glances over their plates of pot roast. They thought they were witnessing the final act of his failure. When he finally made his announcement, the silence that followed was different from the one he had imagined. It wasn't just quiet. It was hungry. It was the silence of predators who have successfully cornered their prey. And then came the toast, the clinking of the $90 crystal glasses, the triumphant shouts of Cedar Lane, the joyous, predatory smiles on their faces. Roxanne's smile was the brightest of all. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were on her father, sharing in their mutual victory. Cyrus let them celebrate. He watched them drink their wine and bask in the warmth of his destruction. He waited until Eleanor brought out the dessert, a $65 cheesecake from a local bakery. As they passed the plates around, he calmly reached down and picked up the manila envelope from the floor beside his chair. He placed it on the center of the table. The sound it made on the polished mahogany was soft, but it cut through their cheerful chatter like a gunshot. Everyone fell silent. All eyes turned to the envelope. "What's that?" Marcus asked, his voice wary. Cyrus looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes one by one. His gaze lingered on Roxanne. Her smile had vanished, replaced by a look of confusion. "That," Cyrus said, his voice even and calm, "is for all of you." David laughed nervously. "Is it a check? Did you get a severance package from your failed business?" "No," Cyrus said. He gently pushed the envelope toward the center of the table. "It's a 60-day notice to vacate." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth from the room. No one moved. No one breathed. What did you say?" Tanisha whispered, her face pale. "I believe you heard me," Cyrus said, his voice still quiet, still devastatingly calm. Inside that envelope are 6 letters, one for each of the families on Cedar Lane. They are official, legally binding lease termination notices. You have 60 days to remove yourselves and your belongings from the properties. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making the plates jump. "This is ridiculous. You can't evict them. Who the hell do you think you are?" Cyrus leaned back in his chair, a profound sense of peace settling over him. The performance was over. This was the truth. "Who am I?" he repeated softly. He looked directly at Marcus. "I'm your landlord." He let the words hang in the air. He watched as the gears turned in their heads, as confusion morphed into dawning, horrified comprehension. Roxanne's face had gone completely white. "Cyrus, what are you talking about? Our landlord is Apex Holdings in Atlanta?" "Apex Holdings is a property management company," Cyrus explained, as if speaking to a child. "A company I hired in 2017 to manage my properties so I wouldn't have to deal with the tenants directly. Tenants like my wife's family." He gestured to the envelope. "Go on, open it. You'll find copies of the deeds to all 6 of your houses. The owner is listed as Cedar Lane Properties, LLC. You'll also find the LLC's articles of organization. As you'll see, I am the sole member." With trembling hands, David reached out and took the envelope. He fumbled with the clasp, his earlier arrogance completely gone. He pulled out the thick stack of papers and began to read. The color drained from his face. He passed a set of documents to Tanisha, who stared at them as if they were written in a foreign language. "It can't be," she stammered, looking at the deed to her own home. "It says Cedar Lane Properties." "It's him," David breathed, his voice cracking. He held up the LLC document, his finger shaking as he pointed to Cyrus's name. "It's all him." Roxanne finally spoke, her voice a strangled whisper. You knew You knew?" "Oh, I know everything," Cyrus said, and for the first time, he let the cold fury show in his eyes. He pulled out his phone and set it on the table. He had taken screenshots of the Green Machine group chat. He swiped through them, slowly, the cruel words and mocking texts glowing in the dim light. Work mule, beast of burden, his little garage. A collective gasp went through the room. They were seeing their own treachery laid bare. "You cheered for my failure," Cyrus said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than any shout. "You toasted the idea of me losing everything, hoping you could pick over the bones. You were wrong. The shop isn't failing. In fact, business has never been better. I just wanted to see your true faces before I made my decision." He stood up from the table. "My lawyer will be filing for divorce at 9 a.m. tomorrow, Roxanne. You'll be served at your office. I suggest you take the settlement he offers." He looked around at the stunned, horrified faces of the Green family. They were broken. Their world, built on his labor and their own arrogance, had just been demolished in the span of 5 minutes. 60 days, he said, his voice final. "I suggest you start packing." He turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the ruins of a family and the uneaten slices of a $65 cheesecake. The silence that followed his departure was the sound of utter and complete devastation. The consequences cascaded almost immediately, a series of dominoes toppling one after another in swift, brutal succession. The first to fall was Roxanne. She was served with divorce papers the next morning, as promised, right at the reception desk of the dental office. The public humiliation was immense. Her boss, Dr. Evans, a kindly man in his 60s, called her into his office and gently suggested she take the rest of the week off. Her frantic voicemails began that afternoon. Cyrus didn't answer. He let them go to his inbox, a digital record of her collapse. The first message, left at 12:15 p.m., was angry. "Cyrus, you bastard, you think you can do this? You can't just throw me and my family out on the street. I will see you in court. You will give me half of everything." The second, at 3:42 p.m., was pleading. "Baby, please call me. We can talk about this. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any of it. We were just joking. Please, Cyrus, don't do this to us." The third, at 9:07 p.m., was a sobbing, incoherent mess. "My life is over. You've ruined me. Everything. I have nothing." She took the settlement. Her lawyer, a man whose $400 per hour fee was being paid by her father, took one look at the evidence Briggs presented. The text messages, the documentation of Cyrus paying for every aspect of her life, the clear financial conspiracy, and told her in no uncertain terms that she would be crucified in court. She walked away with the white Acura RDX, which had a $22,000 loan balance on it, her designer clothes, and the $25,000 Cyrus had offered. She moved into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the south side of town for $950 a month, a place where the air conditioning was unreliable and the walls were thin. The $200 Louis Vuitton bag sat empty on a cheap particle board dresser. The rest of the Green family fared no better. The 60-day notice was ironclad. They scrambled to find new places to live in a competitive rental market. David and his wife, who had been living a lifestyle far beyond the means of his insurance salesman's salary, couldn't qualify for a lease on a comparable home. They ended up in a townhome complex near the airport, paying $1,600 a month for a place half the size of their Cedar Lane house. The leased $52,000 Lexus was voluntarily repossessed 2 months later. Tanisha and Jamal were forced to move in with her parents, Marcus and Eleanor, crowding the pristine Somerville house with their 2 children and all their belongings. The tension in that house became unbearable. Marcus, his pride wounded and his finances strained from paying for Roxanne's legal fees and supporting his now homeless children, became a tyrant. The dream of Cedar Lane, finally ours alone, had turned into a nightmare of 6 adults and 2 children crammed into one house, bickering over bills and bathroom time. The other 3 siblings scattered to cheaper apartments across the city, their cozy family enclave shattered. The financial fallout was devastating. Without the subsidized rent and the constant financial backstop of Cyrus, they were exposed to the harsh realities of their own poor financial decisions. Credit card debts mounted. Arguments over money became a daily occurrence. The Green Machine group chat fell silent, a digital tombstone marking the death of their family's arrogant unity. Cyrus heard through a mutual acquaintance that Marcus Green had been forced to take out a second mortgage on the Somerville house, a loan of $150,000 at a high interest rate, just to keep his family afloat. The patriarch who had sneered at Cyrus's dirty money was now drowning in debt, his own financial house built on a foundation of sand. 1 year later, at 4:30 p.m. on a bright Tuesday afternoon, Cyrus stood on the porch of the old greenhouse in Somerville. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn he now maintained. After the divorce, Marcus and Eleanor, unable to sustain the mortgage and the weight of their broken family, had been forced to sell. Cyrus, through another LLC set up by his lawyer, bought the house for a fair market price of $395,000. They never knew he was the buyer. The house was no longer a monument to empty status. It had a new purpose. Cyrus had converted it into a clean, safe, and free dormitory for the apprentice mechanics in his new training program. He had partnered with a local technical college to create a pipeline for young, ambitious men and women who wanted to learn a valuable trade. The sprawling living room was now a study hall, with comfortable chairs and desks. The formal dining room was a communal kitchen. The upstairs bedrooms were neat, simple dorms. He heard the sound of a bus pulling up and smiled. His first class of 6 apprentices was arriving. They were young, eager, and from backgrounds where opportunities were scarce. He watched as they got off the bus, their eyes wide as they took in the beautiful house that would be their home for the next 2 years. A young black woman with her hair in intricate braids, not unlike the ones Roxanne used to wear, looked at Cyrus with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Cyrus," she said, her voice full of awe, I can't believe this is real." "It's real, Maria," he said, his voice warm. "You earned it. Work hard, and this is just the beginning." His business was thriving. He had expanded Cyrus Diesel Repair, buying the adjacent lot for $150,000 and adding 4 new service bays. He had hired Andre and Paul as his shop foremen, just as he'd promised, and his payroll had more than doubled. The Cedar Lane properties were fully occupied by new tenants, families who paid their rent on time and were grateful for a clean, safe place to live. The portfolio was generating a net income of over $5,000 a month. He thought of Roxanne and her family occasionally, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of distant pity. He had heard she was working 2 jobs to make ends meet. He had heard her brothers and sisters were still struggling. They had worshipped money, but had never understood wealth. They thought wealth was about designer bags and expensive cars. They never understood that true wealth is about building something that lasts. It's about creating value, providing opportunity, and having the respect of your community. It's the quiet satisfaction of turning a key in a lock of a door you own, of signing a paycheck for a person you've trained, of turning a house of pain into a home of hope. True wealth isn't what you spend, it's what you build. It's not about the logo on your purse, it's about the strength of your character. The Greens had a lot of expensive things, but in the end, they had nothing of real value. And Cyrus, the man they called the work mule, had built an empire from grease and steel, an empire founded not on pride, but on purpose. What do you think is the most important lesson Cyrus learned in this story? Was his response justified? We believe in the power of building a life of purpose and integrity, and we love sharing stories that reflect those values. Subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of justice, resilience, and the true meaning of wealth,